And your little dog, too. On the second day of summer vacation, 1969, my dad rolled up into our circular rock driveway in a used, slightly stinky Volkswagen camper van. There was a forced cheerfulness about him as he opened up all the doors to chase away the mustiness and set up the pop-top roof with its hammock-style bed. He showed us the little kitchen, the fold-down bed in the back, and the second hammock that hung across the seats in the front. "Surprise! We're going on a vacation," he chirped brightly. While we kids crawled all over the interior, exploring nooks and crannies and squabbling over who was going to sleep where, my mother stood on the path outside our door, arms crossed, with a look of both resignation and consternation on her face. That night found us packing for a trip, apparently a very long one, because Mom kept adding extra pairs of socks and underwear to our little suitcases. Dad dragged random items out to the van through the night. Blankets and towels, canned food and snacks, a Coleman stove, pots and pans, some board games, a stack of magazines, and our dog's half-eaten bag of kibble. Years later, I came to understand that we weren't so much packing for vacation that night as we were executing an emergency escape. Turns out my dad's most recent girlfriend had put her foot down and demanded, during a teary, drunken phone call to my mother a few nights before, that she let him go because he loves me and he'll never be happy with you. Reportedly, Mom listened to this crap for a couple of minutes and then said, "Yeah, okay," in a matter-of-fact tone before hanging up on the hussy. Only the hints of a long-lost southern drawl, which cropped up whenever she was tired or angry, belied her enragement. I don't know where Dad was that night, but I imagine he'd been at the girlfriend's house and was en route back home when she'd called. It took my mom about 5 minutes to get us kids out of bed, into jackets and shoes, and lined up on the sofa as she dragged a few suitcases out of the hall closet. She placed them directly in the center of the room, where they played their part in this melodrama, loudly declaring our intention to travel. Well, poor old Pop skulked into the house a few minutes later and nearly tripped over the suitcases before he realized that his entire family was up and waiting for him. She calmly informed him that she'd agreed to step aside and let the girlfriend win. Consequently, she was taking us kids back to Oklahoma, and he'd never see any of us again. She bluffed a little bit about having plane tickets and the taxi being on its way, and if Dad had picked up the suitcases, they would have felt a little light. But Mom's piece of improvised theater did its job. That woman could have taught military strategy at West Point. "Find your enemy's most vulnerable spot," she'd tell me, "then pummel it until he hollers uncle." She knew that, ultimately, Dad cared more about his children and his family than any girlfriend. I don't know what was said between my dad and the girlfriend, but that's how we found ourselves, including our farty little dog, stuffed into a stifling Volkswagen camper van a few days later, doing a fast burn toward the Canadian border. We moseyed up the West Coast, stopping at campgrounds and roadside attractions with no schedule or agenda. We saw a giant statue of Paul Bunyan and Babe the Blue Ox at the Trees of Mystery in Klamath, California. Some joker up inside the statue's head hollered "welcome" and sent personal greetings to some of the guests as we approached the entrance. I was mortified when he called out to "the man in plaid," my father, and then to me, "the chubby girl in the red sweater." Halfway up the Oregon coast, we pulled over to visit the Sea Lion Caves. It was late afternoon when we trudged up to the ticket booth, us kids tired and cranky. We weren't prepared for the miles and miles of stairs we had to negotiate to get down to the viewing platform. The sea lions were a letdown, just a few dozen big brown furry lumps sleeping in the sand and smelling of rotten fish. We whined and complained all the way back up to the parking lot, where we had clam chowder and bread bowls before falling asleep in the car as Dad pointed us north again. Going up in the Space Needle in Seattle was both exciting and scary, and we ended up in a hotel room that night, a rare treat. I think my mom had had enough and decided that baths all around and a decent night's sleep was in order. We finally reached Puget Sound and spent almost 2 weeks camping under the canopy of rainforest at Olympic National Park. We went clamming at the beach, and Mom cooked more clam boils than I ever want to see again. We crossed over into Canada on the ferry, with my dad hanging his head over the side and puking most of the way. Mom was a natural sailor, and I think she probably felt the smack of satisfaction at seeing his green face and miserable expression. There were a few tense moments at the border when we prayed that Mac, our farty contraband dog, would stay quiet. Victoria, British Columbia, was and still is one of the most beautiful cities I've ever seen. The streets were dotted with lush hanging baskets of flowers. Petunias, lobelia, primroses, and sweet alyssum perfumed the walkways as we passed beneath them. From Victoria, we traveled east to the Cougar River. It was here that my dad reluctantly decided that it was time to make tracks for home. We crossed over into Idaho and on down to Elko, Nevada, where my dad's parents lived, before picking up the pace and getting back to our house just 3 days before the school year started in the fall. At the time, our uncomfortable trip seemed mostly just a big pain in the ass. But looking back, I really have to hand it to my parents for trying to show us kids a good time while they worked out the girlfriend crisis between themselves. Out of earshot of my brother, my sister, and me, the chubby little girl in a red sweater.